Over the past year, I've released 52 episodes exploring the science of creativity. In this final episode of Season 1, I want to step back and ask a simple question. What have we really learned about creativity? This is the science of creativity, and I'm Keith Sawyer. And this episode is a little different. It's the final episode of Season 1. Over the past year, I've released 52 episodes, conversations with scientists, educators, artists, and creators, along with a number of solo episodes where I've told stories behind some of the most famous inventions, creative breakthroughs in history. When I started this podcast, I had a pretty specific goal. There were a lot of podcasts about creativity already. A lot of them were inspiring. Some of them were pretty philosophical. Some of them were spiritual. And some of them were artists talking about their creative process. And those can all be pretty valuable. But something was missing, I thought. There wasn't a podcast that brought together the scientific research on creativity. There are decades of careful studies, there are theories, there's evidence, but we needed to make all that accessible to a broad audience. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create a podcast that was grounded and authoritative and scientifically rigorous, but I wanted it to still be practical. I wanted it to be accessible, still useful, still something you could use to take it into your own work and your own teaching and your own creative life. And now I'm looking back on these 52 episodes. It's been 2 years, and I think we did that. So let me reflect a little bit on what we've learned. And I'm not going to summarize every episode, but I'm going to step back and I'm going to ask, what are the big ideas about creativity that emerged across the whole season? Because when you look across all of these conversations, I noticed that certain themes came up over and over again, and I wanted to focus on a few of them. So the first one is that creativity is not a moment of insight. It's not a big idea. It's a process. And that, I think, is probably the most important idea that came up across this whole season. We often think of creativity as a sudden moment of insight, like it's a breakthrough idea. But again and again, the research shows something different, that creativity is a process of exploration. It's iteration, it's revision. It's a kind of improvisational process. And you can see this clearly in the stories that I told in the scripted episodes. Like the one I told about the movie Toy Story. The movie that we all know and love was not the original script, and it wasn't even close. The early versions were very different. It had different characters, it had a different tone and a style, and it was a different story. It took years of iteration to get to the final version. And that pattern shows up over and over again when I look at the backstories of inventions and innovations everywhere, even a board game like Monopoly. That was actually the first episode of Season 1, and it's one of the most famous board games in the world. It wasn't invented by a single person in a single moment, but it emerged actually over decades, 3 decades, 30 years, with contributions from many different people. That's what creativity really looks like. It's not a single flash of genius, but it's a long and messy collaborative process. And actually, that's the second theme I noticed when I look back over all of these episodes, collaboration. Creativity is deeply social. That's another idea that runs through almost every episode. We often think of creativity as something that happens inside of an individual mind. The psychology of creativity, right? But the research tells us that creativity is almost always shaped by interaction with other people. It's through collaboration, through conversation, through shared work. And I often call that group flow or group genius. Even when someone appears to be working alone, they're still drawing on a network of influences. They have mentors, they have collaborators. The story of Monopoly is a perfect example of this, where there were hundreds, literally hundreds of people who contributed, and each of them added something small along the way. And when I spoke with researchers and educators over the past 2 years, this idea kept coming up, that creativity thrives in environments where people can interact with each other, where they can build on each other's contributions. The third theme is that creativity is connected to learning. One of the things that struck me across these conversations is how closely creativity was tied to education. I talked to scholars like Tony Wagner from Harvard. We discussed how traditional schooling often fails to support creativity. There's too much focus on memorization. on right answers, on standardized outcomes. But real creativity requires something different. It requires exploration. It requires risk-taking. It requires the freedom to try something that might not work. And it requires a kind of deep understanding, not just a surface knowledge. This connects to the work of people like Ellen Winter, also in Boston at Boston College, who has studied what actually happens when people are learning and making art. Art education, when it's done well, teaches habits of mind that are essential for creativity, like reflection, persistence, the ability to revise your work over time. And they're not just artistic skills, they're cognitive skills. They're ways of thinking that benefit everything you do. The fourth theme that I found emerging over the entire season is that creativity isn't just about making something new. It actually transforms you. It transforms the creator. And this theme came through particularly clearly in my interview with James Kaufman. He talked about what he calls self-transformational creativity. Creativity doesn't just result in a product, it changes you. It gives you insight into yourself. It can be healing. It can connect you to others. It can give your life meaning and direction. It's an important shift in how we think about creativity. It's not just about innovation or achievement. It's also about personal growth and transformation. I found this myself in my interviews with artists and designers and teaching BFA and MFA programs and what they told me about what their students go through when they're learning how to create and become professional artists and designers and learning how to see. The fifth theme that emerged across the 2 years of season 1 is that the most creative people and the most creative environments are interdisciplinary, not people who are specialized and not people who become deep experts in one thing. This theme came up in my conversation with Dana Henriksen. Highly creative people don't stay in one narrow domain. They don't do the same thing their entire careers. They draw from multiple fields. It's like a scientist who plays jazz piano, or a designer who studies psychology, or it's an educator who engages with technology and the arts. This cross-pollination, it's not accidental. It's a key driver of creativity because new ideas often emerge when concepts from one domain are applied in another domain. These are the 5 themes I've noticed in these 52 episodes over the past 2 years. But there's one more thing that I think might be even more important, and that is that all of this research is practical, it's useful. And one of my goals for this podcast was not just to explain the science. And I'm a scientist and I love talking to my research colleagues about their scientific research, but I wanted to make that science useful. And what I found over and over again is that the science of creativity leads directly to practical advice. If creativity is a process, then you need to focus on process instead of waiting for inspiration. If creativity is social, then you need to seek out collaboration and not isolate yourself. If creativity requires exploration, you need to allow yourself to make mistakes. If creativity is interdisciplinary, then you need to expose yourself to different domains. These are not abstract ideas that stay in the laboratory. These are things that you can do to enhance your own life and to enhance your own creativity. So this brings me to something I've been thinking about as I look back on the season. Many of my guests that I've had on the podcast, they're not well known to a broad audience. I mean, they're top researchers. I've known them, many of them, for decades. Everyone working in this field knows who they are. And they've been publishing scientific articles in the top journals. Many of them have books that have been published with like Harvard University Press and University of Chicago Press. These are people who have spent decades studying creativity. And we all know that their research is incredibly valuable, but it's often hidden in these specialized academic journals and books. So one of the things I'm most proud of about this podcast and this first season is that we've brought these voices to a broader audience. We've made that research accessible, and we've shown that science doesn't have to be abstract or distant. It can be directly relevant to your everyday life. After all, creativity is found in every aspect of life. At the same time, I didn't want this podcast to be only about scientists either. So I also invited some practitioners, artists and designers, some theater performers, and even theater directors. I even had a famous cartoonist, Bob Menkoff, on the show, because creativity isn't just something that we study as researchers, it's something that we experience. And by bringing together the researchers and the practitioners, I think we can start to see the full picture. So, what have we learned from season one? If I had to summarize it in one sentence, it would be this: creativity is a learnable, social, process driven way of thinking and acting that anyone can develop. That's a mouthful. It's not magic. It's not a gift that only a few people have. It's something that emerges from how you work, from how you think, from how you interact with others. But it's learnable, you can develop it, and you can enhance your own creativity. As we close out the season, I want to leave you with something that I think is very simple. And if you take one thing from all 52 episodes, let it be this: don't wait for an idea to come to you. Start on the process. Engage with the work. Try something. Revise it. Start talking to other people about it, and let the process guide you. Because, as we've seen again and again, ideas don't come first. They emerge from the process. When I reflect on the season, one thing that I've noticed is how deeply creativity is connected to learning. If creativity is a process that we can develop, then the next question is, how do people learn to become more creative? How can we design learning environments that support this kind of thinking? That's what I'm going to be exploring next. In the coming weeks, I'll be launching a new podcast that's called The Science of Learning. And I'm going to be talking with many of the leading researchers in the learning sciences about how people learn, about how teaching can be improved, and about how we can design learning environments that foster deep understanding and creative knowledge. I hope you'll join me there on the same YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. And I really want to thank all of my guests from this season. And thank all of you for listening. This has been The Science of Creativity. I'm Keith Sawyer, and I'll see you next time.